Welcome to another episode of Adam Answers. For this episode, we're going to go to Facebook. And on Facebook, I was quoted as saying, "You can aid your clients in answering your questions by making your questions small and specific." And to that quotation, Tori Redmond responded, "Oh, I would love to hear more about this one. Can you give an example or two?" So Tori, I would be happy to give you an example. One of the things that I mean by that, like making your questions small and specific, is that oftentimes clinicians ask really big, broad questions that actually make it difficult for your client to answer. So what I mean by that is questions that are really common are like, how does that make you feel? Or what does that look like? If I say to you, like, my desired outcome is to be more courageous, and you say, well, what would that look like? That is such a big, broad question because it might look like behavior, it might look like emotion, it might look like thoughts, it might look like speech, it might look like a whole host of things. And so I kind of pause and I'm like, well, I don't know. It could look like so many things. But if you break that down into really small, simple questions, then it makes it easier for your client to answer, and the description gets really, really rich. So again, if I say, what are your best hopes from this process? And you say, I want to be more courageous, then I can say, if you became courageous in the way that you're hoping for, what would be the very first thing you would notice? So a couple of things. One, I added in the superlative of first. What would be the first thing you would notice? When you make that really, really small, you say, tell me one thing you would notice. It's much easier to answer because now I'm not thinking about like, how do I describe everything it would look like? I'm just telling you what would be the first thing I would notice if I started to feel more courageous. So add things like first, best, greatest, most. Those kinds of qualifiers will make it really, really small, and then your client will have an easier time to answer. The other beautiful thing about that is that you can also say, so if that's the first thing, what else would you notice? What would be the second thing you would notice? And so you can spend a lot of time saying, what else would you notice? What else would you notice? And that makes this description of courage really, really rich and strong. The other thing that's embedded in that question is, what would be the first thing you would notice? Now, solution-focused brief therapy is a change-oriented approach. And what that means is we're looking for differences. We're looking for change. We're looking for small incremental shifts. And so when I say, what's the first thing you will notice, I have to put myself in the frame of mind of, if I feel courage, what would be different about how I perceive things or experience things? So noticing could be an internal thing or it could be an external thing. If I felt more courageous, I guess I would notice that my head is held high, my shoulders are back. What difference would it make to you to be able to notice your head's high, your shoulders are back? Well, it would feel like I could walk into any room that I wanted to walk into. What impact would it have for you to be able to walk into any room that you chose to walk into? Do you see how those are small differences? I notice that my head's up, my shoulders are back. But then I can also do what I mentioned before in the other one, which was, and what else would you notice? Well, I would notice that my head was clear, that I was thinking clearly. And if you started to notice those things, who would be the first person to notice that you were feeling that way, that your head was up, your shoulders were back, your head was clear? Do you see how now I can make these tiny little questions that add richness, that add fullness to the description, and it makes it so that not only is it more answerable for my client, but it also gives them 1,000 different details that they can pay attention to, that they can pick up on. So the change that's happened in the room is that their language has changed. They're describing, my head is back, my head is up, my shoulders are back. My mind is clear. Those changes are described in the room, but when they leave here, then they start to notice when those things show up in their everyday life. So now all I have to notice is my head's a little higher, or my thoughts are a little clearer. And so what that does is it helps bring back as many of these details as we outlined in the therapy room. So the more details we can get, the smaller the details we can get, the more opportunities we give to our clients to be able to notice those things outside of the room. So again, solution-focused brief therapy is a change-oriented approach. I'm asking about changes through noticing in the room, but also that makes change outside of the room much more likely, because now they have all of these little tiny details that they can pick up on, that they can notice, that they can then be reminded of the rest of the description that they gave us. So hopefully that helps answer when you add these superlatives, When you ask noticing questions, the questions get really, really small and detailed, and then therefore the client has a much easier chance to answer the questions. So Tori, hopefully that was useful. I would love to hear what your thoughts are about that. Also, if you have other questions, please feel free to send them in. We're always looking for good questions for Adam Answers.